I finally used my life savings to buy the beautiful house I had dreamed about for years. Running a hand through my short gray hair, I felt incredibly proud stepping onto my new porch. But my happy moment was ruined the very next morning when my children pulled into the driveway. They did not come over to celebrate my big milestone. Instead, they marched up to my front door with a lawyer and handed me an official court order. The legal paper actually claimed I was mentally unfit and demanded full control of my money. I was completely heartbroken by their awful betrayal, but they had no idea I still had one major card left to play. The devastating confrontation actually began while I was enjoying the crisp morning air on my fresh porch. I admired the smooth wood railings and the fresh coat of white paint shining in the early sun. This quiet neighborhood was exactly what I wanted for my retirement years. My peaceful morning was abruptly interrupted by the crunch of tires on gravel. A sleek dark sedan drove up my long driveway and parked right in front of the house. I had not been expecting any visitors today. The car doors opened, and two familiar faces emerged from the backseat. My son David stepped out first, followed closely by my daughter Sarah. I smiled and raised my hand to greet them, thinking they had decided to surprise me for a housewarming visit. However, my welcoming smile quickly faded when the driver also exited the vehicle. He wore a sharp gray suit and carried a large leather briefcase. I had never seen this stern-looking man before in my life. The three of them walked up the wooden steps without returning my greeting. The man in the gray suit stopped directly in front of me and cleared his throat. He stated his name loudly and explained that he was a licensed attorney representing my children. Reaching into his briefcase, he pulled out a thick stack of papers bound by a heavy metal clip. He shoved the heavy pile into my chest, forcing me to take it. The top page featured an intimidating legal seal. I flipped the heavy cover open, my hands trembling slightly as I scanned the bold black text. The complex legal jargon was confusing at first, but the main point was completely obvious. My own children had filed an official petition with the local court system. The shocking document formally requested a judge to declare me completely mentally incompetent. They claimed I was losing my memory and could no longer handle my own finances. I stared at the dreadful pages in absolute horror and disbelief. Before I could even process the devastating words on the page, David stepped forward aggressively. He held out his hand and demanded that I surrender the house keys immediately. He told me the property was no longer mine to control and that I needed to start packing my belongings. Sarah stood silently behind him, refusing to even look me in the eye. They planned to remove me from my dream home and force me into an assisted living facility. I refused to let my greedy children take away everything I had worked so hard to build. Without saying a single word, I stepped backward into the entryway and slammed the heavy wooden door shut. Their muffled shouts echoed from the porch, but I ignored them entirely. I reached up and twisted the heavy brass deadbolt, securing the lock with a loud click. They were not getting inside my house today. I walked quickly into the kitchen to figure out my next move. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away from the entryway. I rushed into the kitchen and grabbed my cell phone from the granite counter. My hands were still shaking slightly, but I managed to unlock the screen. I scrolled rapidly through my contact list until I found a very specific name. I pressed the green button to call my old friend Michael, hoping he was available. I desperately needed professional help to figure out what was really going on. Michael and I had known each other for over 20 years. He worked as an independent private investigator in the city and had built a solid reputation for uncovering hidden truths. He usually handled corporate fraud, but he always made time for old friends. After only 2 rings, his familiar gruff voice came through the speaker. I let out a long sigh of relief hearing him answer so quickly. He could tell right away from my tone that something was terribly wrong. I paced back and forth across the kitchen tiles while I explained the morning's awful events. I detailed the unexpected visit, the aggressive lawyer, and the ridiculous court order claiming I was losing my memory. Michael listened quietly until I finished outlining the entire betrayal. I told him David and Sarah must have an ulterior motive for trying to seize my assets so suddenly. I asked him to dig deeply into their recent lives and find out what they were hiding from me. Michael agreed to take on the investigation without a moment of hesitation. He promised to treat the matter with top priority and told me to stay safe inside the house. Hanging up the phone, he immediately booted up his powerful office computer. He accessed several restricted databases to start running background checks on both David and Sarah. He spent hours carefully searching through online public financial records, court filings, and property deeds. The investigator was determined to uncover the truth behind their aggressive legal actions. I barely slept that night, constantly worrying about the impending legal battle. Shortly after sunrise, a familiar truck pulled into my gravel driveway. Michael stepped out of his vehicle and walked briskly up to my front door. He looked incredibly serious and carried a thick brown paper folder securely under his arm. I quickly unlocked the deadbolt and ushered him inside the house away from prying eyes. He followed me directly into the dining room without saying a single word. We stood around the large oak table in tense silence. Michael unclasped the heavy paper folder and pulled out several thick stacks of paper. He carefully spread dozens of printed bank statements and credit reports across the smooth wood. The pages were covered in highlighted numbers and red warning markers. He pointed to the documents and explained that the evidence he uncovered was quite alarming. He wanted me to look closely at the shocking details for myself. I slowly leaned over the table, my eyes scanning the highlighted sections on the messy pages. The documents displayed a massive volume of negative balances and missed payments. I gathered the scattered papers into neat piles, making sure to keep the pages in chronological order. I carefully collected the physical evidence and secured it inside my personal leather briefcase. This information was going to be absolutely crucial for my upcoming court date. I finally understood exactly why my children were attacking me. Reviewing the organized files, the terrible truth of the situation finally emerged. My hired private investigator had uncovered an enormous trail of financial ruin behind both of my children. David had lost his job months ago and maxed out multiple credit cards, while Sarah had defaulted on a massive business loan. The combined debt between them was staggering. They were both secretly bankrupt and entirely out of options. Their desperate situation explained their sudden and cruel ambush at my front door. The printed documents revealed exactly what was going to happen to them. Several aggressive collection agencies were already preparing to seize their vehicles and garnish whatever small income they had left. The records proved they needed a massive cash injection to save themselves from total ruin. They wanted to declare me incompetent so they could legally seize my assets. Their ultimate goal was to force the immediate sale of my new dream home. They planned to use my life savings to completely pay off their angry creditors. I needed undeniable proof that my mind was perfectly sharp. I grabbed my phone and called a highly respected medical clinic located just across town. I explained the urgency of my legal situation to the receptionist and begged for an immediate opening. She managed to schedule an urgent appointment with a licensed psychiatrist for that very afternoon. I gathered my coat and drove across the city, determined to protect my independence. My children had picked a fight with the wrong man. The clinic waiting room was quiet and smelled strongly of sterile cleaner. A friendly nurse eventually called me back into a small office where an older doctor greeted me. He explained that a cognitive assessment would be thorough and potentially exhausting. For the next hour, the doctor asked me a series of complex questions about my life and current events. He instructed me to solve math puzzles and recall specific word sequences. These difficult tasks specifically tested my short-term memory and overall awareness. I focused entirely on the doctor, ignoring the stressful thoughts about the impending lawsuit. I confidently answered every single question correctly, without a moment of hesitation. I easily solved the mathematical equations and repeated back the complicated word sequences in perfect order. I even recalled the names of all his office staff that I had met only briefly. I completed the entire rigorous evaluation process without making a single mistake. The doctor smiled broadly as he tallied up my final score on his clipboard. The psychiatrist set his pen down and adjusted his glasses. He told me that my mental acuity was sharper than most people half my age. Reaching into his desk drawer, he pulled out a piece of official clinic letterhead. He printed out a flawless medical certificate detailing my perfect assessment scores and signed it with a heavy flourish. He then used a mechanical stamper to mark the bottom of the page with a clear time and date. I finally had exactly what I needed to stop my children. The following morning, I grabbed my leather briefcase and headed out the door. I drove straight to the downtown courthouse, navigating the busy city traffic with calm determination. After passing through the heavy metal detectors at the entrance, I checked the directory for my designated location. I rode the crowded elevator to the third floor and walked confidently down the marble hallway. Taking a deep breath, I quickly walked into the assigned hearing room. My children were already sitting at the plaintiff's table. The stern judge called the morning session to order and asked the plaintiffs to present their case. David and Sarah stood up together and repeated their terrible, false claims against me. They told the judge lie after lie about my failing memory and my inability to handle basic daily tasks. Their lawyer chimed in, insisting that I was a severe danger to myself and my finances. They acted incredibly sympathetic, pretending they only wanted to protect their poor, defenseless father. I listened quietly, waiting for my turn. When the judge finally asked for my defense, I stood up and confidently opened my leather briefcase. I stepped forward and approached the wooden bench, asking for permission to submit new evidence. I handed over the thick stack of highlighted bank statements Michael had gathered. I calmly explained how my children were deeply in debt and facing imminent collections. I used the undeniable financial records to expose their true, greedy motives to the court. The courtroom fell completely silent as the judge reviewed the pages. David loudly objected, claiming my evidence was just a paranoid delusion of a sick man. He insisted my statements only proved how mentally unwell I truly was. I ignored his aggressive outburst and turned my attention back to the judge. I reached into my briefcase one last time and pulled out my final card. I handed the judge my official, flawless psychiatric evaluation from the exact day before. The bright red time and date stamp proved my mental clarity was current, tested, and absolute. The judge carefully studied the signed medical certificate for a long moment. He looked down at David and Sarah with an expression of pure disgust. The legal standard for declaring someone incompetent required actual proof of mental decline, which they clearly lacked. Banging his wooden gavel loudly, the judge immediately dismissed the frivolous lawsuit completely. He warned their lawyer about filing fraudulent petitions in his courtroom ever again. My undeniable medical evidence had permanently destroyed their vicious case against me. I walked out of that courthouse feeling immensely relieved. My dream home was officially safe, and my independence remained completely intact. However, I knew I still had one more important task to handle. Later that afternoon, I visited my personal estate lawyer to completely rewrite my final wishes. I finalized my new will, ensuring my assets would be donated to charity upon my passing. I signed the official legal documents and permanently disinherited both of my treacherous children.